Economy has arrived. The world is teeming with innovation as new business models reinvent every industry. Inside Analysis is your source of information and insight about how to make the most of this exciting new era. Learn more at InsideAnalysis.com.
InsideAnalysis.com.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, welcome to The Future Indeed. Your host here, Eric Kavanaugh, for the only coast-to-coast radio show all about the information economy. Inside Analysis. Folks, I'm very excited to have two experts on the call today for what is arguably the new center of gravity in the data world, and that's the data catalog. So what is a data catalog? For those who've been around for a few years, you may know data dictionaries, for example. Wikipedia, you go to Wikipedia, a lot of companies have wikis these days. They're kind of like catalogs. It's a portal that has definitions about things. It has information about projects and entities within the organization. And of course, the whole point is you want to use something like a data catalog to help your organization understand what the data means. That may sound like it's simple, but when you start getting into the weeds a bit, you realize how complex it can be, especially for a complex business model, maybe for an insurance company or a healthcare company, financial services, but even retail, even manufacturing. There are countless terms that are used in various ways. And if you have a data catalog, you can help define those. And what you really want is a collaborative effort. You want people from all around the organization getting involved in this, not just a handful of IT people try to chase down the business leaders who know what things mean. That's how data catalogs have been built over the years. It's not a very effective mechanism because the IT people are constantly trying to track down the business people who maybe are not that easy to get a hold of. And with us today, we've got a couple experts. We're talking to Wilson of Athena Solutions and Kirit Basu of Metaphor. Metaphor is a vendor. They have a data catalog that they sell, which is very interesting stuff. Look them up. Metaphor Data is where you can find them. They're on LinkedIn. They're on Twitter, now called X, I suppose. But let's kind of dive in. So, Aaron, I'll bring you in first from Athena Solutions. You're in the business of helping companies understand their data, connect the dots. That's really what data catalogs do, right? They connect the definitional dots of information in your organization and help you understand what all that information means, right, Aaron?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the new generation of tools, I don't think it can be overstated, what an advantage these tools have over prior generations of metadata management tools bring in. And it's the efforts that companies have gone through with the more traditional methods, the data dictionaries and various tools that have been used in the past. It's difficult to get off the ground, and it's difficult to get users really engaged into the governance process. And I think what we're seeing is these tools, they make it a lot easier to sort of democratize the process.
Mm-hmm. And you made a really good point there. And your colleague, Ala Zakin, on a show I did with her a couple months ago, made this really interesting comment that really stuck with me. She said, one beauty of a data catalog is it forces the business to pay attention, right? That's when you have engagements because they understand what they do all day will have some report that goes to senior executives maybe or to the board or to someone else, even out to end users, for example. And they understand that if those definitions are wrong, that report's going to be wrong. So when they understand what you're working on is this data catalog, which is going to drive and govern how information gets shared and reported, that makes them pay attention, right?
Well, definitely. I think that, nobody knows, generally speaking, the data better than the people who are using it, right? But, I think the problem that we've had in the past, as I've said, is that, the tools it was difficult to get involved. It was difficult to jump right in to a conversation about data definitions, just as an example. It was difficult to get an up-to-date data lineage when people wanted to see one. So I think that we're actually, the slide that I used in my presentation was data dictionary. The need was there, but the technology wasn't. But I think we're actually at a point where the technology is there.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And Kirit Basu from Metaphor, I'll bring You've been in this business for a while in the data world, and you know there's tremendous value in data, but only if people understand it. And I'll throw another quote from Ala at you and just get your commentary on this. She said, in order for data to be an asset, it must be understood. What do you think about that, Kirit?
Absolutely. And in fact, I'd add to that, and understood by whom. Yeah, like
Yeah.
sure, the data team understands, or business sort of like the analyst populations understand. But from our perspective, we care to make sure that everyone in that supply chain, right from the people who are producing it all the way to someone who's just looking at a report, can really take it in, really understand the things, simply be effective, be, sort of really add to that value, if you will, for having that data, of using that data in the first place.
Yeah, and I just think, because I'm an old school publisher, so I've been in print production where you would print 85,000 magazines and then realize there's a typo in the first paragraph of the lead article, and you're just like, oh no. And that's not the world we live in anymore. But you think about data definitions in a printed document, well, guess what? Things change. New terms come around, the definitions change. So the fact that we have this digital world now where the repository is malleable, it can be changed over time and it can be up to date such that anyone who logs in at any time sees the latest information. It's a simple thing in a way, but that's one of the reasons why these catalogs are now so much more effective and so much more usable, is because they are dynamic. They can change quickly and everyone can get access to the latest version, right, Kiran?
Yeah, absolutely. One example I was just quoting you earlier is one of the many things that we do within our tool is allow you to basically persist institutional knowledge, meaning conversations that are happening on Slack or Teams about like the evolution of data, evolution of metrics, etc. And literally within one click, sort of persisted within the catalog. And the moment it is, like literally within the next few milliseconds, few seconds, depending, it'll show up within the catalog, right? So the next time someone is asking for that term, even if they're completely separate, completely different silo, they immediately know what's the most recent version of whatever it is that people were talking about or were looking for. So yeah.
Right. And that gets to collaboration and the importance of collaboration, that, it's really kind of intense, the different world we live in today compared to even 5 years ago. I mean, for some companies, even last week, right? Because as you know, there's a very long tail of software and processes in businesses. And we're all inside this industry, so we're up to date with the latest developments, but a lot of companies are not. And so the stark disparity between an old world system where there's like a printed document that one person prints, and if he's on vacation, then you can't even get access to it, to today where you have this dynamic sort of living, breathing catalog of definitions that anyone can take part in. That's a huge disparity. And I almost think that the mindset change is one of the hardest for the business to wrap their heads around. No, we don't have to do it the old way, guys. You can now do it this new way. And look how nice it is. What do you think about that, Kiran?
Yeah, one quote that comes to mind, a customer told us a while back. He basically said, um, the best catalog is one when there is no catalog at all. And what he's really meaning is that, it- exactly like you mentioned, the IT team, for example, might have their own point of view on how things are going, but the reality of what users are doing on a day-to-day basis,
Right.
where they're doing it, no one really knows, unless it's a very, very well managed sort of organization. For most average organizations, different sort of centers of knowledge just keep emerging and going, coming and going, so to speak. And that's one of the things that we really try to tap into, right? How could we get someone who has zero experience with catalog? Heck, they really should not even need to know what the heck a catalog is.
Right.
They
Right.
get value out of the catalog. But on the
Right.
other side, from the producer side, you have now great visibility into what people are asking. It's like a direct, being a product manager, for example, it's like having a very, very direct window into exactly what a customer is doing and they're asking for, pretty much in real time, if you think about it.
Yeah, and that's so important because let's just kind of quickly get into organizational dynamics and how we've traditionally done things. And how you do things is you have meetings, right? Like the marketing team comes in, the sales team, the management team, all these folks come in and you go through the meeting one at a time. That is a very old school way of doing things. You can have much fewer meetings now if you embrace this kind of approach, because guess what? It's just like, and it's adding almost a meta layer on top of existing communication channels like Slack you mentioned, or email, if you can capture email inside of an intranet or a portal, for example. You can capture with your technology, if it's connected properly, obviously, you can capture all these conversations about the business. And then by using these large language models, by using the sort of Gen AI components, very quickly spin up answers in natural language for what's happening in the company. So you don't have to call someone, you don't even have to email someone. You're just in the system, you ask it a question, you'll see who's been doing what and where. That's like the ultimate collaboration. What do you think, Kirit?
Yeah, absolutely. The one quote that comes to mind, or a meme, I guess, was this meeting could have been an email.
Yeah, right.
That's exactly what's happening. So many companies are obviously, whether it's in Slack or Teams, they're having discussions about data, really evolving the data as they go along on a day-to-day basis. And the ability to be able to take that and basically persist that, like you mentioned, with large language models, but with one important caveat, right? Like, this is not a very generic, hey, here's your chat bot, or whatever it is a lot of these companies do, like, here, go talk to Chat GPT and figure it out. Well, it's not really that. Of course, we use these large language models, but more importantly, we've tapped into all the other content that there is, like all the business glossaries, all the technical metadata that we have. And so the answers coming out of the system are highly, highly contextualized and relevant to what you're doing, and not just Chat GPT, hallucinating.
Right.
Fun.
Right. Which is a problem. I mean, and that's the challenge of just using a generic tool, as powerful as it may be, something like ChatGPT. It's incredibly powerful. It's great for text generation, but there are people who misuse the tool all the time. I even saw a guy, a very senior level person, I think, from Meta, who was ragging on ChatGPT, and he said something. He came up with the crap ratio, which is a clever idea. I get it. The crap ratio of like, how good is the material you get back? Is it good or is it crap? But he gave it a very complex sort of mathematical question, and I'm thinking, dude, that's a misuse of the tool. It's not what it's designed to do. Now, I'm guessing that there are going to be better and better reasoning engines baked into these over time. That's probably going to happen. But right now, it's just for text generation. So you always have to be careful about how you use the tool and understand the purpose of the tool. You're not going to be using a data catalog to create graphics for your magazine, for example. It's just not the right use. So it is important to understand the use. But to your point, Kirit, and I'll throw it back to you just for a comment here. In context, that kind of collaborative information is extremely valuable, and it allows you to save time. It allows for that meeting to just be an email, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I think this is one of the reasons why it's really important for companies to know what they're getting into with regards to sort of adopting Chat GPT, because the exec sort of mandate will come down, hey, we should do Chat GPT to get better, but it's going to be some weird chatbot experience which really doesn't work. And so that's why we spend a huge amount of time really trying to make sure the marrying of the metadata that currently exists, making really activating that through a language model is the way to go, right? So using the right tools is absolutely critical in this equation.
Yeah, and I'll throw it over to Aaron to kind of comment on this. Aaron, specificity really matters. Context really matters with these kinds of technologies and these kinds of use cases. And to Kirit's point, if you are capturing the metadata and managing that intentionally, maybe in a RAG model, for example, as long as you're leveraging that and the fact set from your information and you're just using the AI engine to spin up text, that's when you're going to get pretty good results. You're not going to get too many hallucinations when you're within context doing what the business does. What do you think, Aaron?
Well, I certainly think that, based on the demos that I've seen, I've seen a little bit more of Metaphor than he showed here today, although I thought it was a really good introductory demo. And the way that Metaphor does it is really impressive. By essentially, they're using the communicative ability of generative AI, but they are enforcing some context. So in other words, you're asking the data catalog. You can either you can also ask if you want confirmation from an answer that you think might be a little bit wonky. You can jump right in and ask a subject matter expert. And again, being able to do it without actually using an actual just using, for example, Slack or whatever is it's a pretty compelling advantage.
Yeah, because it sits on top. That's what gets me so excited. And maybe I'll throw this one over to you again, Aaron. I was talking with a gentleman, very interesting guy, Neil Hunch. He runs a company called Silicon Foundry out of San Francisco, and we did a show talking about a bunch of different aspects of. It was actually around supply chain, but we were talking about information sharing and Gen AI and some of these new engines. And the summarization capabilities of Gen AI are really impressive. If you haven't used them, folks, you have got to use this. Take a big long document, 40 pages, for example, load it into ChatGPT and ask it to summarize around different threads and give me a voice for the board, give me a summary for the IT team. It's really good at doing that stuff. And what got me excited is he said that organizations are using it to leverage that 80% of data in the company that is unstructured. Well, let me tell you, SharePoint was, kind of going to do that, and there were some other ways, Elasticsearch. There are other ways that we've used technologies to kind of get at that data, but there's nothing like I've ever seen with these technologies, and that means that what? I don't know, something happened there. It was weird. That means strange things are happening here in the world. But real quick, Aaron, comment on that. We got a minute left before the break.
Yeah, I mean, that illustrates one point that I'm actually curious to know a little bit more from Kirit, which is that there's a back end to the governance process where everybody wants to see governance teams produce some sort of report, or a summary, something that they can tangibly say, here's our product, here's how well we're governing our data, and it sounds like with the tools generative AI, you can generate those kinds of products, those kinds of reports, so that the governance team now can actually present you something tangible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
go ahead.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead, real quick. 30 seconds. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, we are absolutely doing things like that. And in fact, we're trying to push it further where you don't even have to ask the questions. Can we just tell you what you need to know? But that's a little roadmap. Yeah, we'll get to that soon.
Yeah, but I mean, seriously, folks, what we're talking about is the ability to ingest, synthesize, and then articulate key points about your business dynamically all day long, all day, every day. I mean, that is like having a virtual assistant who knows everything that you need to know, just available at your fingertips to tell you what's going on. Well, folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to the only coast to coast radio show all about the information economy. It's called Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, you can see why I love that song for our show. Take us to the future, baby. That's Black Bananas is the band, if you want to look them up. And I used my quote earlier today, one of my favorite quotes that we use for our TV show, Future Proof, by William Gibson, who once said that the future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. I love that show. I love that concept. It's just brilliant. And it's true. So we're diving in. We're talking to Aaron Wilson of Athena Solutions and Kirit Basu from Metaphor today about data catalogs. And as I've said, data catalogs, in my opinion, are the new center of gravity. And in many ways, they are like a metaphor for business. So if you think about what a metaphor is supposed to be used for, it's to help you understand complex concepts. We come up with metaphors to describe things so you can figure out what someone really means by something. And that's what metaphors do. So in many ways, the data catalog is like a metaphor for business. And Kirit, I'll throw this one over to you. And I understand your solution and how it works, so I've got a pretty good grasp on that. But I'm just thinking here, the more time and effort people put into it, the more access your engine has to Slack messages, to emails. even video calls that can be automatically transcribed these days. You've got technologies like I think Gong is one of them, and there's Otter, and there's a bunch of these others that automatically transcribe your meetings and give you summaries afterwards. It's like whiz bang, wow, hello, where have you been all my life? When you can capture all that, you are incrementally building institutional knowledge day after day, right, Kirit?
Absolutely. The thought that comes to mind is so many people have said this where AI and LLMs are really at that they're at the Sega console moment right now. There is so much more that's happening. Multimodal models are already very, very impressive, but the directions that they're going are going to be absolutely amazing. And so yeah, we are constantly keeping an eye out on what's the latest, greatest, and being obviously very cautious about how do we bring it in. Just like I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure it's not just, hey, here's a portal to an LLM. Like, no, here's a portal to an LLM through the context of your data.
Yeah, and maybe Aaron, I'll throw it over to you. You think about some sort of an layered architecture, and up here is all the information that's being shared, and in between you've got this data catalog, and then you've got databases and things like this down underneath. And that data catalog it's like a lens through which you can view the world, like a kaleidoscope or something. But it's a lens that allows you to understand the definitions, and ideally you want it to be connected to your reporting and your analytics, your business intelligence, your and whatever you're using to analyze your data. Because if a definition changes of, let's say, customer, let's say we figured out some new way to define customer and we're no longer including some category that we did include, missing little changes like that can have a great impact on reporting and can give you bad numbers, like duplicates, for example. If you figured out, oh no, these are dupes now, we have to get all these duplicates out, your total number of customers goes from 1,000 to 850. That's going to change the numbers of your revenue per customer, of your categorization of customers, all these kinds of things. That's why it's important to have this collaborative effort around the data catalog. What do you think, Aaron?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've brought up a couple of different, issues there that the point to how the new technology is so useful. I mean, one of which we're talking about here is lineage, right? And the idea of being able to correct errors quickly. I myself have been through, and many of the people on this call, I'm sure, have been through, the difficulty of trying to trace back a data error and find out then how many reports were impacted is always the big question. Was it just this one report, or would you have a whole nightmare of clients that were impacted? But the lineage tools, to just name one, are extremely, to be able to get your hands on lineage that's accurate, instead of looking at charts that you don't even know how old they are. I mean, it's extremely valuable.
Yeah, Kiran, I'll throw that over to you because there are some of these issues that we have been contending with for years. One of which is outdated reports, for example. And now we have all sorts of really cool technologies around observability that show us when data feeds are not working properly, and they give alerts to end users, people who are delivering reports, for example, aha, there's a problem here. Let me go check and fix it before the report is due or whatever. They're cool things that you could do. But the lineage and the timelines of things are very important because something changes at a certain point. Do you have the capacity to roll back to other versions and see things, or how does that work?
Yeah, so, well, a couple of things. We don't actually touch your data, so we're only looking at metadata. So we're sort of inferring things out of metadata and presenting it to you.
Interesting, right?
But yeah, absolutely. We do show version histories of things. You could certainly go back and see when changes have occurred. So we can help fix all of those kind of things. Or certainly get you much, much better insights into how to fix it by pinpointing the right places where these kind of things happen.
Hmm. Yeah, and that helps because, as Aaron suggested, some changes made, maybe it was made incorrectly. All of a sudden, the reports start adding up, and this is why business analysts ask questions, right? This is why they're looking at, wait, there's something wrong with this. Looking into, in the old days, it was like, good luck figuring out what went wrong if you don't have the documentation. But now you really can figure out what went wrong, and that's all very positive for being able to sort of true the wheels of business, if you will, and ensure the accuracy and the relevance of the data. What do you think, Kirit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the way we think about it is ours is sort of a merging of three different graphs, if you will, right? Like there's the technological graph, so connections between systems. There's the business graph, which is glossary terms, how they relate to objects within tables, etc. And then, as we call it, the social graph, right? Like how are people using? What are they talking about? How are they interacting with the data, etc. So we bring all of these things together. And so, to your point, when someone needs to go back and say, okay, what happened at this point in time? It's not just here are the technical changes that have happened, but oh, by the way, here are the conversations that were happening about this data,
Wow.
which led to this result, and here you go, right? So it's a much, much more fuller picture of what happened and when.
Yeah, that's amazing because you can learn, and I'm guessing, and Kirit, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing that especially over time, you can also get a very good feel for who knows which subject matter better than others. You could probably ask it, who really understands this SKU in our manufacturing environment, or who understands this region? Those kinds of questions can probably be answered very accurately now if someone's using this kind of technology, right?
Absolutely. I would say there's, certainly a lot of governance people would want to specifically go out and mark an individual or two as being the expert, but then the
Right.
natural expertise that has just arisen because there are people talking about it, etc. You could easily pinpoint these kind of clusters, if you will, of knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, Aaron, I'm going to throw that over to you. That's a really big deal. Like, think from the perspective of a senior executive who is in here trying to understand what's going on in the organization. Maybe there's a recent merger or acquisition or something, and they're trying to wrap their head around who knows this or who knows that. To be able to ask a question of a data catalog like that, who really understands our business in the Southeast region, or who really understands this product line, and get some dynamically generated answer based upon conversations happening in the company. Is it me, or is that just a massively cool deal?
Yeah, I think it's potentially a huge advantage. It's going to be a shift, though, and I think that's one of the things I'd like to ask Kirit about is that now that you sort of democratize data, and then it's no longer this top-down, as Eric you pointed out, maybe a senior manager who goes to his manager, who goes to his next report down the line, says, "Where's this data come from?" Now it's been democratized, but it's a real I would imagine that companies undergo a real sort of cognitive shift in terms of the way they operate. And I'm curious to actually know what Kirit has seen, when they introduce these types of tools.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about every governance role that's out there, you look at their job descriptions, it's about like chasing down governance problems and making sure tagging is right, etc. Pretty much everyone hates doing the manual labor involved in doing that stuff. But with technologies like ours, it allows them to actually be about governance, right? Like they can step back all the way and say, okay, big picture, how am I solving the problems that my company is having, that the real role of governance sort of really shines through with the power of these technologies to take out the mundane that everyone has to do otherwise and make it that much more effective.
Yeah, and I think that that gets to one of my favorite soapbox topics, which is morale. And I'll throw this back over to you, Kirit. Once you understand what the changes that this kind of technology brings, which are significant, but once you wrap your head around that and understand it, I think it's great for morale because the things that kill morale are spinning your wheels, not being able to get answers to things, not being able to change what needs to be changed, not knowing who is responsible, not knowing who I can reach out to get answers. All these things are solved, at least to some degree, with this approach. So I have to think that improves morale because by and large, if people feel like they're getting somewhere, they're getting something done, they're making progress, that's excellent for morale. It's the opposite that gets them depressed. What do you think, Kirit?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I mentioned this earlier. The quote that we hear from most of our customers, especially who spend a lot of time in legacy catalogs, is, catalogs are where data goes to die. And
Yeah.
that is fundamentally one of the issues where people don't care about working on these, especially antiquated systems. The UIs are terrible, all those kind of things. And now this is a whole new paradigm where heck, you don't even need to be trained on the catalog to get value from it. So yeah, absolutely, morale makes a huge difference in that.
Well, and in training too. So you think about upskilling, training people. A catalog, again, properly used, properly installed, etc., is a great training vehicle because it is an access point to information about business processes, about terminology. I mean, you talked, Kirit, about understanding the relationships between systems, and that's a very important thing as well. And again, this generative AI concept, these technologies can do tremendous things in explaining things, explaining how these two systems interconnect, right? Go ahead, Kirit.
Yeah, so I think this is where, from a product perspective, the point of view that we take is Gen AI is one of the tools in our toolkit, right? Like the other really, really critical one is, in fact, the user experience and the user interface in general. My philosophy really is like the moment you have to make a context switch and go and look up a document, or like documentation, etc., you've missed the point completely. So to have an experience, whether it's magical through AI or it's a very procedural thing, but having it be so intuitive, so simple to use is one of the baselines for us as we design any kind of capabilities, because we want to make sure every user gets value out of the catalog.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, and this kind of gets back to another theme that I have about the UI and the point of interaction with the business. And what I think is very compelling about what you folks at Metaphor has done is that you are leveraging the places where they're already going. You're leveraging Slack because you're indexing what goes across Slack. You're leveraging email if they get access to the email. Whatever channel of communication people are already using, you're taking advantage of that. So you're not forcing people to go into some separate environment to ask questions. To your point, I think most people know that when you're bouncing around from this app to that app to some other app, it's disruptive. It's a discontinuing sort of event, and it is disruptive to the brain. I mean, not that you can't do it, you can, but it's like a hurdle you have to jump across, and you've kind of knocked all those hurdles down. Isn't that about right, Kieran?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I challenge people to find any, or if anyone has less than, I don't know, 20 tabs open in their browser, for example, I'd like to meet them. But yeah, I mean, why introduce 50 other, browser windows? You have to go searching through stuff, switching context, hard switching context. Whereas the actual problem you were trying to solve was completely different. It has to do with business, but now you have to go through all the details. So that's exactly one of the reasons why, Slack, Teams, we want to make sure that we can give the answers you want right there, with all the context and all the stuff behind it, right?
Yeah, well, it's a big time saver, first of all, and it maintains that continuity. Aaron, I'll throw this over to you. We got about a couple minutes before this segment is up. Analysis is a thought process, and it really should be fluid in order to be effective. And what I mean by that is if you're bouncing around from one app to another, that's not very fluid, right? Those are sort of truncated moments or disruptive moments when you're bouncing around. And you want to have that true conversation with your data. We've talked about that for 30 years in this industry, but now you really can have the conversation with your data if it's connected to the information systems, if it has a data catalog layer, which is making sense of things, and if you're able to use this Gen AI stuff. Real quick, you could have a conversation with your business data. What do you think, Aaron?
I completely agree. I mean, I think you can't overstate the value of kind of eliminating that layer, right? Of having to go to another tool separately. I've personally done it. And that's the way most, of the previous generation of these tools have worked. But to be able to just, interact directly on Teams, on Slack, that type of thing. And then if you do need to provide, sample data and talk about the problem or jump on a call or something like that, you can also do those things too, but without that extra layer of going to your governance tool, as it were.
That's exactly right, folks. People want to work in one environment. They want to be on the phone or in a Zoom call or whatever, doing their thing. They don't want to have to jump all around. But don't touch that dial, folks. We're going to be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, we're talking to Aaron Wilson of Athena Solutions and Kirit Basu of Metaphor. They are a data catalog company, Metaphor Data. And Aaron, you had a question for Kirit, so go ahead.
Yeah, what I was curious about from Kirit's perspective is, we have data governance teams. Most companies that deal with data have a data governance team, and this type of functionality, with a product like Metaphor, really, I would think completely would reshape, kind of their daily existence, because I'm looking at it from the perspective of so much time spent on information gathering, right, and curating. And with a tool with a modern data catalog tool, this probably shifts them more into making it, probably allows them to come up with policy quicker and a number of other things now that they've kind of got a lot of that mundane work out of the way. But I'm curious to know what perspectives you've gotten from clients.
Yeah, so I think it's across the spectrum. Obviously, I'll give you the high and the low side. So on the low side, or the very simplistic sort of side, we certainly have customers where yes, governance teams are there and they have sort of a vision of what they do, but the reality is that the company on the whole might not be fully aligned with that vision, right? Like the governance person wants to get something done, but the rest of the company is still trying to get there, etc. So we certainly have, like, it's helpful in that sort of realm because it, like you said, allows them to step out of the mundane and say, okay, big picture, here are the types of things I can actually get done now that I don't have to do the manual work that I would otherwise have to do it on a day-to-day basis. So that's one side. The other side, absolutely, we have customers where they came in effectively saying, oh yeah, I need to be a data governance person. And I looked through all the documentation on the internet and it says, these are the 20 things I have to do. And oh, by the way, now I have to do like half a thing, right? Like, or I could think much more big picture. And so a lot of times we find organizations who are much, much more further advanced and matured. So they're already on their like data mesh or data product, one of those sort of journeys. They've already built out some of those kind of things. They can take a much bigger view and they're effectively redefining governance. They're talking much higher picture. They're talking about like, here's the data product and here's how I'm going to evolve it. Nothing to do with the menial labor that you'd have to do. You're focusing on the data. You're focusing on the actual problem and the outcomes that the company cares about.
That's awesome. I mean, really, you think about OKRs, right? Maybe I'll throw it over to you, Aaron. I remember when this whole concept of objectives and key results came out, as opposed to just numbers and things, because business is very unwieldy when you get right down to it, and you want to be striving towards things, but not just basic metrics, right? Because if you're just going for metrics, what happens? They turn into vanity metrics. So this objectives and key results, I think, is pretty important stuff. And a data catalog is a great conduit to help you get there, to help you define reasonable OKRs and know if you've gotten there, right, Aaron?
Well, it definitely would be. I think what it would do would open the door to making, nothing against KPIs. I'm sure organizations will, always have a use for those, but you could probably make them a heck of a lot better by being able to get your hands on maybe additional data. I mean, dashboards will be easy. It'll be easier to come up with a new data point and understand it and incorporate it into a dashboard and make it that much more useful because you can get your hands on the data and understand it better. And you might find that users from all over the organization can participate in that process, whereas it may not have been the case earlier.
Mm-hmm. And that's the key point, again, to get back to collaboration. Kirit, I'll throw it back over to you. Anyone can log into this. Anyone, I mean, obviously they have to have permission to do so, but having teams from different parts of the organization be able to make their comments about things, especially folks in the field who would say, hey guys, I noticed something and that's not correct. Can you fix this? All of a sudden, it's like you're fusing what were disparate channels. Like think support, for example, versus email versus Slack, right? The guys in the support and the girls in the support area, they're at the coal face, as they say, dealing with customers, and they're going to see stuff. And historically, it's been very difficult for that feedback to make it all the way up the IT ladder to the person who has the authority to change something. And that's just out the window now, right?
Absolutely. I'll give you a great example of this. We have several customers who've been through this recently where, they're old school sort of point of view on doing governance was like, let's get coverage. So let's make sure that, I don't know, 100% of our data is documented. And let's be honest, most documentation in that case was like one sentence. Oh, this table does blah. And that's the end of that. So we've sort of changed that around. What we've basically said was like, hey, look through all the comments that you're having, questions coming in through Slack or support channels, etc., and then basically answer your top 25 questions, meaning you literally write it out verbatim, see if the system has an answer. If you don't, great, here are buttons, and guess what? Here's help with AI, which will help you generate that right answer as well. And basically, within a couple of hour window, you could answer the top 25 questions and every single variation, infinite variations, because that's where the LLM really shines. I asked for how do we define revenue? Your version of that statement is big. How is revenue defined? Doesn't matter. We'll get you the answer. We know how to get to that point. So that has been like a huge change in how like the old way of doing things has completely been supplanted by a very outcome oriented way to get to the answers that you need.
Yeah, and real quick, and we can maybe get into this in the podcast bonus segment a bit deeper. We've only got a couple minutes left here, but I'm going to throw us back to this concept of an abstraction layer that can absorb from all these existing channels, right? One of the challenges of deploying a new technology is that it's a new app, it's a separate login, all this stuff you have to go and do. And then, historically you set up pipelines and things, but the fact that you're pulling from all these existing channels and allowing for all that to be baked into this data catalog, that I think is one of the real key differentiators, because now you're not forcing people out of Slack, you're not forcing people out of email, you're allowing them to work where they work and live where they live. You're just adding this layer of value to it, which is a reconciliation layer, a definitional layer. What do you think, Kirit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is, yeah, the way I think about it is, the stuff that we do in addition with the AI sort of capabilities, it becomes kind of like the great equalizer of sorts. So it's no longer that you have just the data people who are the experts. And I mean, of course, people are experts. We're not denying that. But the availability of that expertise is instantaneous to someone who's, not in that role. And so absolutely, it's the abstraction layer, but it's more than that. It's an equalizer for people.
Yeah, I'll ask you to comment on that, Aaron. I mean, it's kind of a slam dunk, right? If you can afford to do this and you can get it done in your organization, it's kind of a slam dunk to do something like this. What do you think, Aaron?
For sure. And one of the points that you kind of touched on there is the fact that the ability for a product, for a modern data catalog product to not just work with the data assets, but also through the distribution channels. I find that particularly, I mean, I just think that's really cool. The fact that you can monitor and track how often is somebody talking about this particular data series, right? Who's talking about it? What reports is it appearing in? I mean, I guess that's it's part of this concept that people are calling active metadata. This idea that, you have a feedback loop now. You know what your relevant data points are much more than you used to under the old environment.
Yeah, and just that usability side of the equation. Who's using this? What are they talking about? You think about what do they call word bubbles, where you see which terms are most popular. These are all useful constructs to help guide the attention of the executive or help guide the attention of the frontline worker. I mean, that's the other thing is customer service. If someone's on the call, if you can patch this into a customer service center, think about it in the call, that person needs to have whatever information is available and relevant right now, and you want it very quickly. You can't be waiting, especially if the customer is angry, calling up all upset. You can't be like, "Oh, my systems are running slow today. Sorry, sir." Nobody likes to hear that. But these kinds of information flows can be extremely valuable for anyone in the organization, whether you're on the front lines, whether you're middle management, whether you're an executive. If you give partners access, for example, the point is it's a knowledge repository. And I'll go back to that comment I made earlier about the gentleman from Silicon Foundry. The aha moment in my head was Knowledge management. Remember that, guys? Like 25 years ago, before even business intelligence became a thing, it was knowledge management. And it kind of went nowhere because
Mhm.
there just wasn't the compute power. There weren't the technologies available to really make sense of all that stuff. And now that is all here. That whole paradigm has shifted to where you can do actual, real, tangible knowledge management with in your organization. Folks, that is not a small thing. We're finally going to be able to truly leverage this 80% of corporate data, which is unstructured. But podcast bonus segment is coming up next, folks. You're listening to Inside Analysis. Okay, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on Inside Analysis, talking to Aaron Wilson of Athena Solutions and Kirit Basu of Metaphor. Aaron is a consultant. If you need some consulting help, give Athena a call. Kirit, he's the vendor if you need a new tool, and I think everyone does. You got to get a data catalog, folks. This is good stuff. Call Kirit and his team. Aaron, I'll throw it over to you. Metadata management. I remember 20 years ago, talking to a client about his metadata repository, and I was such a babe in the woods. This is like 24 years ago, in fact. I'm like, I keep talking to these vendors and they all have their own metadata catalogs, but wouldn't it be good if there were like one metadata catalog that we all kind of adhere to? And that's like an ontology, right? I'm like little babe in the woods out here. And he like kind of shakes his head. He's like, well, yeah, that would be good, I guess, but that's just not really the way things work out there in the real world. But we're kind of getting close to that. But maybe just talk real quick, Aaron, about metadata management, why it's so important, and how things are changing now about how you do that.
Sure. Um, I mean, I think it's no accident that, some of the bigger companies that are really data intensive, and I mean, if you look at Metaphor's origins, coming out of the data team at LinkedIn, um, they they were under enormous pressure, probably more pressure than most, right? To get valuable insights out of an enormous quantity of data, and you can't really do it effectively if you don't have any concept of metadata management. You have to have commonly agreed upon data definitions. You have to be able to get your hands on lineage quickly. So I think that the old way of doing things, you need to bring clarity to these things, and you don't have a whole lot of time to do it. You don't really have a lot of time for a governance team to assemble, for example, a collection of terms or a data dictionary. But it's tremendously valuable to be able to kind of get to the point when it comes to metadata management.
Yeah, good point. I'll throw it over to you, Kirit, and maybe talk about how metadata management has changed because I mean, it used to be a fairly manual process, and only a couple people touched it. They had to go, like I said earlier, to go talk to the business, try to figure stuff out. Now it could be much more dynamic and is very useful in terms of understanding who's doing what, which metadata is being accessed, what's the important metadata we got to watch out for. All those things are now much more clear because we can see what's happening, right, Kirit?
Absolutely. So, I'll give you a simple example. When you're searching for like, what's the definition of revenue? Let's say you plug that into our system. The answer you're going to get is not just the actual definition of revenue. Of course, there's that. It might be specified in a glossary somewhere, or could be in a dictionary, depending on what that metric is. But we'll also give you other context. We'll give you all the other context. Well, yeah, here's the definition. But by the way, here are the stated owners of these, or here are the conversations happening about. So what you get is a much, much more richer contextual answer about what it is, whatever it is you're asking for. And so, yeah, I mean, it's still a human doing the interpretation, but now you've made that human into basically an analyst, even if they were not, for example, right? Like they are able to synthesize much, much more interesting data to get to a conclusion that they need to.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And it's funny you would say that because our show is called Inside Analysis, and our tagline is take the inside track to insight. But our whole mission was to enable the audience to be an analyst. Like that's our whole job in the world is to share information about tools, technologies, processes, people, to help people understand how to ask the right question, put it in context, and they make better decisions about well, number one, the tech that they use for sure, but the business and how they run the business. So I think that's really beautiful that you just said that. You spoke to our whole raison d'être, as the French would say. So good work. Final comment, Aaron. Final piece of advice about how people should get started or do something with this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say that, with companies that are struggling with these types of issues, this is an important decision to make. Is whether do I need, and if this was the title of one of our prior presentations, what data catalog do I need? A lot of considerations. One of them, though, I would say is this: is that if a company has a reasonably good handle on, their data challenges, and what's interesting is, I would say 10, 15 years ago, most companies would consider themselves, by their own admission, very much behind the curve. But now that we've gotten, companies are further ahead in terms of data warehousing and integration, and then you often left with the metadata problem. It's kind of what's left. It's kind of like, well, we have good, we have good time to market. We have our data is better organized, but yet we don't have general agreement. We have problems around definition and lineage and so forth. These are the kind of tools that companies may very well be ready for if they find that those are their pain points. And that's part of what we do at Athena, is to come in and do an assessment and to say, like, hey, what are your pain points? And then we can hopefully line you up in terms of vendors with the vendors that go to those strengths.
Good stuff. Well, folks, thank you so much for your time today, for listening in. Thanks to Kirit Basu of Metaphor and Aaron Wilson of Athena Solutions. We do archive all these webinars for later viewing. Share it with your colleagues. One nice thing about Zoom is the URL for the live show is the same for the archive. Brilliant. Someone was thinking that's an architectural decision someone made at Zoom a long time ago, and it was fantastic because WebEx was not like that. It was a different URL. Someone said, you know what? Let's make it the same URL for usability, for consumption, all this great stuff. So check out Metaphor online, Metaphor Data, Data Catalog, and Athena Solutions. And with that, we're going to bid you farewell, folks. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.